Going live. All right. Hey, everybody. Hope you're clicking in with us. Glad to see all of you coming in and getting ready to have this fine conversation with us all. It's a heavy night, I'll tell you. I feel the heaviness. I don't know if all the rest of you are feeling similarly. That boy, there's just seems like there's a lot on the line tonight. Some of us have been working really hard to keep this in people's minds, and man, it just feels like there's a lot. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's part of me that like has a little bit of a, I can't wait to see what happens tonight. Like there's getting a little echo there, Doug.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I clicked on a magic button that made your echo.
Yeah, there's some sense of like, the excitement before a big game, like that, that you've got that sense of like, okay, this could be something.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you have like, I also have this sense, and I think that this is what you were echoing, is that the reason that we are having this event tonight, like it's not sports, it's not entertainment. It is the former president of the United States and his cohorts in Congress and otherwise sought to overturn the results of a presidential election.
Yeah.
And resorted to violence, storming the Capitol of the United States that resulted in the deaths of at least 9 people, on that day and in the days following as a result of it. And democracy was on the line. And now, as a result of that, like this investigation has taken place. It has been stymied at every turn by Republican leadership and and people loyal to the former president. And now we're going to find out, what this committee has learned throughout their investigation. And it feels like this is a critical moment. I wasn't alive during the Watergate hearings.
I was, and I'll tell you, as a 6-year-old, it was absolutely riveting. It was really something that captured your imagination in the first grade where we were.
I can't tell if you're being sarcastic there, Doug.
No, I am. I'm joking. As a child, I had no idea. I mean, they must have told me that there was an impeachment of the president. Maybe I was even in second grade, but zero memory of that at all.
My 7-year-old is outside in the backyard playing right now, has no sense that like there is a monumental thing about to happen.
I mean, I know we say the children are our future, but boy, they're just not paying attention. I don't know what we're going to do about that. I don't know what we're going to do to get these kids to, start doing their part and paying attention.
Them roped in. What are you hoping to see tonight, Doug? What do you have? Do you have any sense of like what you're, and I'd be curious for those that are here with us, jump into the comment section. I'm really interested in what you're hoping to see tonight. What expectations you have.
Well, okay. Before I do that, I'm going to bring Peggy in here. Peggy, I think, has accidentally clicked the wrong link, and I just want to bring her on. We can explain to people what's happening when we have somebody that pops in. So this will happen on a fairly regular basis. So here comes old Peggy. Hi, Peggy. All right. So here's the thing. We're doing this live on YouTube, and anyone who's already here and hasn't clicked our subscribe button down there, we'd really, really love for you to do that. There's a lot of things that helps us with in our YouTube presence. But then we also offered people a link in the registration email. That link would bring you on the screen here with me and Rob. So if that's something that you're hoping to do, then go ahead and click on that link. Now you've already figured that out. All right, let's see if Peggy's ready to come in here. Hi there, Peggy. I think. But what's happened is that some people, because we sent an email with 2 links, one to join the conversation and one to just watch the YouTube video. Some people are coming in accidentally. So I think old
Yeah.
Peggy's having some trouble on that one. So if other people are also having that kind of trouble, maybe they'll look back at the email and realize, oh, there's a separate link. But those of you that are already watching this on the YouTube channel, anyone who's not because you didn't get a link and you've just found us, really glad to have you. I'm Doug Padgett. This is Rob Ryerson. Rob and I are going to be the host tonight, and we're going to bring on other people to comment too, the people that are in the chat. So if you have that link, it's your chat. And I'm really interested in people's thoughts on what they think is going on tonight and how they're feeling about it. I don't know anything about the schedule. I've heard little bits and pieces about the order, but I don't know if there's breaks. I don't know if there's moments that we can talk over this. I'm not sure if this is going to feel more like, Mystery Science Theater or the two old guys from the Muppets, or like
Statler and
commentators.
Waldorf. That was Statler and Waldorf. Their names.
They have names? I didn't know.
Yeah, Statler and Waldorf.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I know that because my best friend and I used to refer to ourselves as Statler and Waldorf during sermons in chapel in Bible college.
Oh, is that so? That's great. Well, on the larger note, the thing that I'm really looking forward to here is more detail about what they know. I remember Mitch McConnell shamefully saying, we don't need an investigation of this because we all know what happened. We all were there. We saw it. Well, no, we don't know what happened. And there's no single vantage point that someone would be seeing these activities that you would say to yourself, oh, I've got it. I got it wrapped up. That's just, first of all, just not a fair way to reflect on anything, let alone something of this kind of consequence. So I'm very interested in what they've seen from the multiple witnesses, from the video footage that we have not yet had access to as just citizens without the kind of authorization that these people on the committee have. So I'm very interested in that. Is there new content that can enlighten? Because there's still pieces of all this that I don't really understand. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel I've watched a lot. I pay a lot of attention to it. I really, I have a lot they're starting up this committee here.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of action there in the
I can see
committee
it.
room.
Yeah, so here, this is what we're seeing here on the C-SPAN side. I'm just gonna. So I'm interested in what they know that we don't know, right? That's what's intriguing to me, and I sure hope there's new content. Look, they're taking this seriously as a committee. They're going to put all of this forward, so there is going to be something, it seems to me, and I sure hope that it's meaningful and worthwhile. We've never done this setup before where we're live streaming a YouTube channel inside of our YouTube channel.
Doug, can you full screen that?
Yeah, I'm going to full screen it. Yeah. I just need to do a couple of things here to figure out how I can turn down that audio inside of here. So in just a minute, I'll make that.
Yeah.
I'll prop that up. So go ahead and talk for a second, Rob. Or how about reading in the chat? Can you see the
see the chat? So Deborah's answering the question, says, I'm hoping the committee will be clear, concise, detail the evidence, and name names. And I'm with you on that, Deborah. I think the same thing. I'm super interested in the logistics of this. I've heard that this is going to be a combination of both testimony and multimedia. This is like committee hearings for the information age. And so I think that that's going to be really fascinating to see how that goes and what that looks like. And if, I think the challenge the committee is going to have is crafting a narrative that sticks, telling a story that clearly shows, because there's two stories that need to be told. One is the events that happened on January 6th and who was involved, how it happened, all of that kind of stuff. That's one narrative. There's a second narrative related to the planning and the lead up and who was involved. So there's kind of the stuff that's happening in and around the White House. And then there's the stuff happening in and around the Capitol building. And those two, being able to tell that narrative, those two narratives, and weave them together in a way that, like, we're not just, you know, drinking. So I think I'm interrupting myself.
Are you
I
about to
think
say
that,
drinking from a water hose or from a fire hose?
yeah, well, I think the challenge that the committee has is finding the balance between not making us feel like we're drinking from a fire hydrant with so much information, and at the same time not giving us a nothing burger, like there's got to be something here. And so their ability to tell the story in a clear and compelling way, like Deborah says, that actually sticks, that's going to be, I think, a challenging thing. And so, they've got this, fascinatingly, they've got this former ABC producer, a guy who was producer of Good Morning America and Nightline, that has been helping the committee get prepared for this.
So basically, somebody with the sensibilities of the late 1990s is putting together all of this. I mean, I'm glad they've got a Hollywood producer or a TV producer in on this, but Nightline hasn't been, I don't know. All I'm saying is, Good Morning America and Nightline doesn't really grab the hearts of everybody. So I hope it feels less, like that and more, more like a documentary that we see, right? Which feels like it's unfolding the truth that we all want to see and that we all want to hear. I see a message from somebody else that knows we're watching this tonight, and they've instead of chatting it in, they wrote this text. They said, please, please, please let this actually be worthwhile tonight. I think that really captures the sentiment of a lot of people.
I think you're right.
And then, Jim says he's really hopeful that there's going to be justice for the Capitol Police officers and others and their engagement on this. Yeah, it's just, it's still, it's just hard to not be reminded of how bad it was and how Trump it was, right? Don't forget, yes, it was an attack of the Capitol, but this one shot that we have on the screen here, it was Trump supporters and that Christian flag in the middle of it. Part of the reason that we're doing this at Vote Common Good is because we know that the religious narratives in the United States were utilized to make this insurrection happen. It was fueled and funded in great part by Christian nationalism and people that saw that as a goal that they wanted to achieve. And we have to remember that. I hope that comes up. I hope that the finger is placed where it needs to be placed. And look, it might not be what the people in the committee wanted to put their finger on, but if they don't, we will. Now again, hey, if you're just joining us, we're going to do our best to figure out how to have this conversation make sense. I'm just glad you're here to watch it together. Very often when I'm watching something of consequence, I like to have somebody else in the room, or I text a bunch of people. That's where this idea came from. Like, well, rather than just texting a bunch of people, let's get on and see if we could be in the same chat space. And we've chosen to use our YouTube channel for this instead of Zoom or something else. So we're glad that you're here. And if you're new to our YouTube channel, do all the things you do. Click on the like buttons and subscribe buttons and all that kind of stuff, because not only are we dealing with, a raging, violent insurrection, but the way you have to communicate in the 21st century is also pleasing an algorithm, and that's what those little buttons do when you push on the subscribe button and the like button and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, Doug, did you hear the comments of Jack Del Rio, the defensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders football team, formerly a team known by a racist name? He's a longtime NFL coach. He's been a head coach, and he was somehow wandered into talking about January 6th, and
no, I didn't hear his comments,
and was comparing it to the Black Lives Matter protests, and he referred to the insurrection as a little dust up that happened at the Capitol.
I did see that there was commentary somewhere about a little dust up. I saw, I think, Heather Richardson's great email, daily email that comes out, mentioned that. And look, I'll just say, I live in Minneapolis, one of the places where some of the first Black Lives Matter protests revolving around the murder of George Floyd took place. I was there. I was maced by the police with what we would colloquially call tear gas. Technically, it's not, but it does the same thing to you. I had rubber bullets shot at me and right over my head. I was standing in the middle of the crowd with my arms out and a love shirt on and a clerical collar, begging for the police to stop shooting rubber bullets at people in Minneapolis. I just want to be perfectly clear. There were no rubber bullets fired by Capitol Police. There was no National Guard for hours. There was National Guard on our streets in Minneapolis sooner than that. So people that want to make this comparison and contrast, let me just say, it's not as if anybody took the violence lightly that took place from the police and against our cities during the protests of the summer of 2020. Some were violent. Some were done by right-wing extremists. We know that. The people who burned our city in Minneapolis, they were caught by the FBI, and they were Boogaloo Boys, which are this group of right-wing extremists that come into cities to try to stir up racial animus. That's who it was. So I'm glad to have that conversation. We should have that conversation in our society because we've allowed a narrative to roll that, you know, and look, I know every city's different. Places are different and different places have had different experiences with it. I'm just saying this kind of idea that, you know, hey, we didn't do anything about what went on. Oh, I promise you there was a lot. We were on curfews in Minneapolis for weeks. There was a lot that went on. And this thing that went on at the Capitol, look, I wasn't there on January 6th, but I watched it. I was in Minneapolis, you know, on May 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30, 31 of 2020. So I get a little hot under my proverbial and literal collar when I hear people try to spin this narrative. Like, oh, we make such a big deal out of this. Well, this was trying to destroy our democracy. Yeah. All right. Well, here we go. I think I'll turn the volume coming in. On. What do you say? Yeah, we'll let that volume roll here. They're not saying anything. We will. We're going to be irritating like this to people. I really hope not. If we are, put a chat in note in the chat if we're talking too much. If you really want to hear more, I don't know. Let us know that too. Feels appropriately somber and on time. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, and they, you know, gave a couple of minutes for the networks to get in and do their introduction.
I feel like we're talking over a golfer who's about to make a putt. Your mute is on.
I'm not getting any volume, Doug.
Really? You're not hearing volume, Rob?
No.
Doggone it. Let me figure this out. Sorry, y'all. I don't know what's happening. Pardon me, all. We're going to work hard here. Representative Thompson is just giving some personal remarks of his own experience, so maybe I can get this figured out here.
The next few weeks, hopefully you will get to know.
Pardon me, all. We're working on the volume here.
You just had it, Doug.
All of us have.
We have it now?
No, you had it when it was on the little screen.
That same oath that all members of Congress.
I'm sorry, Rob. Say it again.
Go back to the previous. Go back to the one with it's in the middle between us.
In office
this
and
one?
afterwards every 2 years if they are reelected. We swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign.
It's gone now.
All of us, that nearly every United States government employee takes have their roots in the Civil War. Throughout our history, the United States has fought against foreign enemies to preserve our democracy, electoral system, and country. When the United States Capitol was stormed and burned in 1814, foreign enemies were responsible. Afterward, in 1862, when American citizens had taken up arms against this country, Congress adopted a new oath to help make sure no person who had supported the rebellion could hold a position of public trust. Therefore, Congresspersons and United States federal government employees were required for the first time to swear an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That oath was put to test on January 6, 2021. The police officers who held the line that day honored their oath. Many came out of that day bloodied and broken. They still bear those wounds, visible and invisible. They did their duty. They repelled the mob and ended the occupation of the Capitol. They defended the Constitution against domestic enemies so that Congress could return, uphold our own oath, and count your votes to ensure the transfer of power, just as we've done for hundreds of years. But unlike in 1814, it was domestic enemies of the Constitution who stormed the Capitol and occupied the Capitol, who sought to thwart the will of the people to stop the transfer of power. And so they did, so at the encouragement of the President of the United States. The President of the United States trying to stop the transfer of power, a precedent that had stood for 220 years, even as our democracy had faced its most difficult test. Thinking back again to the Civil War in the summer of 1864, the President of the United States believed we would be doomed to his bid for re-election. He believed his opponent, General George McClellan, would wave the white flag when it came to preserving the Union. But even with that grim fate hanging in the balance, President Lincoln was ready to accept the will of the voters, come what may. He made a quiet pledge. He wrote down the words, "This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect. It will be my duty." Lincoln sealed that memo and asked his cabinet secretaries to sign it sight unseen. He asked them to make the same commitment he did, to accept defeat if indeed defeat was the will of the people, to uphold the rule of law, to do what every president who came before him did, and what every president who followed him would do, until Donald Trump. Donald Trump lost the presidential election in 2020. The American people voted him out of office. It was not because of a rigged system. It was not because of voter fraud. Don't believe me? Hear what his former Attorney General had to say about it. I warn those who watching that this contains strong language.
No, just what I've been through. I had 3 discussions with the president that I can recall. One was on November 23rd, one was on December 1st, and one was on December 14th. And I've been through sort of the give and take of those discussions. And in that context, I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And, I didn't want to be a part of it. And that's one of the reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did. I observed, I think it was on December 1st, that how can you can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based on its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that there was fraud in the election.
Bill Barr, on Election Day 2020, he was the Attorney General of the United States, the top law enforcement official in the country, telling the president exactly what he thought about claims of a stolen election. Donald Trump had his days in court to challenge the results. He was within his rights to seek those judgments. In the United States, law-abiding citizens have those tools for pursuing justice. He lost in the courts, just as he did at the ballot box. And in this country, that's the end of the line. But for Donald Trump, that was only the beginning of what became a sprawling, multi-step conspiracy aimed at overturning the presidential election, aimed at throwing out the votes of millions of Americans, your votes, your voice in our democracy, and replacing the will of the American people with his will to remain in power after his term ended. Donald Trump was at the center of this conspiracy. And ultimately, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, spurred a mob of domestic enemies of the Constitution to march down the Capitol and subvert American democracy. Any legal jargon
Doug, can you send us back to the other one that had sound?
Does this not have sound?
No.
Does this one? Talk to me, Rob.
I'm talking to you now.
Okay,
No
you're talking
sound.
now. But there was sound a minute ago.
There has not been sound since you've gone to this screen.
How about now?
Nope.
What we do here.
There we
America has long been
Okay.
expected.
Sorry, I didn't know.
to
I
be
was
a
waiting for you to
shining
tell me if
city
there was
on
sound.
the
Sorry about
hill,
that.
I
a
was
beacon
texting
of
you.
hope and freedom.
Well, I was not able to
A
read the
model
text.
for
Sorry.
others.
Pardon
when
me,
we are
everybody,
at
about
our
that.
best. How can we play that role when our house is in such disorder? We must confront the truth with candor, resolve, and determination. We need to show that we are worthy of the gifts that are the birthright of every American. That begins here, and it begins now, with a true accounting of what happened and what led to the attack on our Constitution and our democracy. In this moment, when the dangers of our Constitution and our democracy loom large, nothing could be more important. Working alongside the public servants on this dais has been one of the greatest honors of my time in Congress. It's been a particular privilege to count as a partner in this effort and to count as a friend the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney. She's a patriot, a public servant of profound courage, of
I'll
devotion
just say,
to her
as Benny
oath
Thompson is
and the
interviewing or
Constitution.
introducing Liz Cheney
It's my
here,
pleasure
I
to
could
recognize Ms.
I could
Cheney
listen to Benny
for her
Thompson
opening
saying
statement.
Donald Trump's name.
Thank you very
just
much,
on a
Mr.
loop.
Chairman, and let me
Amazing.
echo those words about the importance of bipartisanship and what a tremendous honor it is to work on this committee. Mr. Chairman, at 6:01 p.m. on January 6th, after he spent hours watching a violent mob besiege, attack, and invade our Capitol, Donald Trump tweeted, but he did not condemn the attack. Instead, he justified it. "These are the things and events that happen," he said, "when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who've been badly and unfairly treated for so long." As you will see in the hearings to come, President Trump believed his supporters at the Capitol, and I quote, "We're doing what they should be doing." This is what he told his staff as they pleaded with him to call off the mob, to instruct his supporters to leave. Over a series of hearings in the coming weeks, you will hear testimony, live and on video, from more than half a dozen former White House staff in the Trump administration, all of whom were in the West Wing of the White House on January 6th. You will hear testimony that, quote, "The president did not really want to put anything out," calling off the riot or asking his supporters to leave. You will hear that President Trump was yelling and, quote, "really angry" at advisors who told him he needed to be doing something more. And aware of the rioters' chance to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it." You will hear
Wow.
evidence that President Trump refused for hours to do what his staff, his family, and many of his other advisors begged him to do: immediately instruct his supporters to stand down and evacuate the Capitol. Tonight, you will see never-before-seen footage of the brutal attack on our Capitol, an attack that unfolded while a few blocks away, President Trump sat watching television in the dining room next to the Oval Office. You will hear audio from the brave police officers battling for their lives and ours, fighting to defend our democracy against a violent mob Donald Trump refused to call off. Tonight and in the weeks to come, you will see evidence of what motivated this violence, including directly from those who participated in this attack. You will see video of them explaining what caused them to do it. You will see their posts on social media. We will show you what they have said in federal court. On this point, there is no room for debate. Those who invaded our Capitol and battled law enforcement for hours were motivated by what President Trump had told them, that the election was stolen and that he was the rightful president. President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. You will also hear about plots to commit
important.
seditious conspiracy on January
is.
6th. crime defined in our laws as conspiring to overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the government of the United States, or to oppose by force the authority thereof. Multiple members of two groups, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, have been charged with this crime for their involvement in the events leading up to and on January 6th. Some have pled guilty. The attack on our Capitol was not a spontaneous riot. Intelligence available before January 6th identified plans to, quote, invade the Capitol, occupy the Capitol, and take other steps to halt Congress's count of electoral votes that day. In our hearings to come, we will identify elements of those plans, and we will show specifically how a group of Proud Boys led a mob into the Capitol building on January 6th.
Wow.
Tonight, I am going to describe for you some of what our committee has learned and highlight initial findings you will see this month in our hearings. As you hear this, all Americans should keep in mind this fact. On the morning of January 6th, President Donald Trump's intention was to remain President of the United States, despite the lawful outcome of the 2020 election and in violation of his constitutional obligation to relinquish power.
Wow.
Over multiple months, Donald Trump oversaw and coordinated a sophisticated 7-part plan to overturn the presidential election and prevent the transfer of presidential power. In our hearings, you will see evidence of each element of this plan. In our second hearing, you will see that Donald Trump and his advisors knew that he had in fact lost the election. But despite this, President Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information to convince huge portions of the U.S. population that fraud had stolen the election from him. This was not true. Jason Miller was a senior Trump campaign spokesman.
The political rhetoric.
In this clip, Miller describes a call between the Trump campaign's internal data expert and President Trump a few days after the 2020 election.
I was in the Oval Office, and at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on, and I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
And that was based, Mr. Miller, on Matt and the data team's assessment of the sort of county by county, state by state results as reported?
Correct.
Alex Cannon was one of President Trump's campaign lawyers. He previously worked for the Trump Organization. One of his responsibilities was to assess allegations of election fraud in November 2020. Here is one sample of his testimony discussing what he told White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
When was that conversation?
Probably in November, mid to late November. I think it was before my child was born.
And what was Mr. Meadows' reaction to that information?
I believe the words he used were, so there's no there there.
There's no there there.
No there there.
The Trump campaign's general counsel, Matt Morgan, gave similar testimony. He explained that all of the fraud allegations and the campaign's other election arguments taken together and viewed in the best possible light for President Trump could still not change the outcome of the election. President Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr also told Donald Trump his election claims were wrong.
Repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that I did not see evidence of fraud and that would have affected the outcome of the election. And frankly, a year and a half later, I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that.
Attorney General Barr also told President Trump that his allegations about Dominion voting machines were groundless.
I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there, and I told them that it was crazy stuff, and they were wasting their time on that, and it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
But President Trump persisted, repeating the false Dominion allegations in public at least a dozen more times, even after his Attorney General told him they were, quote, complete nonsense. And after Barr's resignation on December 23rd, the acting Attorney General who replaced him, Jeff Rosen, and the acting deputy, Richard Donahue, told President Trump over and over again that the evidence did not support allegations he was making in public. Many of President Trump's White House staff also recognized that the evidence did not support the claims President Trump was making. This is the president's daughter commenting on Bill Barr's statement that the department found no fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
Wow.
As you will hear on Monday, the president had every right to litigate his campaign claims, but he ultimately lost more than 60 cases in state and federal courts. The president's claims in the election cases were so frivolous and unsupported that the president's lead lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, not only lost the lawsuits, his license to practice law was suspended. Here's what the court said of Mr. Giuliani. Giuliani communicated demonstrably false and misleading statements to courts, lawmakers, and the public at large in his capacity as lawyer for former President Donald J. Trump and the Trump campaign in connection with Trump's failed effort at re-election in 2020. As you will see in great detail in our hearings, President Trump ignored the rulings of our nation's courts. He ignored his own campaign leadership, his White House staff, many Republican state officials. He ignored the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump invested millions of dollars of campaign funds purposely spreading false information, running ads he knew were false, and convincing millions of Americans that the election was corrupt and that he was the true president. As you will see, this misinformation campaign provoked the violence on January 6th. In our third hearing, you will see that President Trump corruptly planned to replace the Attorney General of the United States so the U.S. Justice Department would spread his false stolen election claims. In the days before January 6th, President Trump told his top Justice Department officials, quote, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Senior Justice Department officials, men he had appointed, told him they could not do that because it was not true. So President Trump decided to replace them. He offered Jeff Clark, an environmental lawyer at the Justice Department, the job of acting Attorney General. President Trump wanted Mr. Clark to take a number of steps, including sending this letter to Georgia and 5 other states, saying the U.S. Department of Justice had, quote, identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election. This letter is a lie. Wow. The Department of Justice had, in fact, repeatedly told President Trump exactly the opposite, that they had investigated his stolen election allegations and found no credible fraud that could impact the outcome of the election. This letter and others like it would have urged multiple states to withdraw their official and lawful electoral votes for Biden. Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue described Jeff Clark's letter this way, quote, "This would be a grave step for the department to take and could have tremendous constitutional, political, and social ramifications for this country." The committee agrees with Mr. Donahue's assessment. Had Clark assumed the role of Attorney General in the days before January 6th and issued these letters, the ramifications could indeed have been grave. Mr. Donahue also said this about Clark's plan.
And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
In our hearings, you will hear firsthand how the senior leadership of the Department of Justice threatened to resign, how the White House counsel threatened to resign, and how they confronted Donald Trump and Jeff Clark in the Oval Office. The men involved, including Acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen and Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue, were appointed by President Trump. These men honored their oaths of office, they did their duty, and you will hear from them in our hearings. By contrast, Jeff Clark has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination and refused to testify. Representative Scott Perry, who was also involved in trying to get Clark appointed as Attorney General, has refused to testify here. As you will see, Representative Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon. Multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election.
Did she say congressman?
In our fourth hearing, we will focus on President Trump's
so.
efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes on January 6th. Vice President Pence has spoken publicly about this.
President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
What President Trump demanded that Mike Pence do wasn't just wrong, it was illegal and it was unconstitutional. You will hear this in great detail from the Vice President's former general counsel. Witnesses in these hearings will explain how the former Vice President and his staff informed President Trump over and over again that what he was pressuring Mike Pence to do was illegal. As you will hear, President Trump engaged in a relentless effort to pressure Pence, both in private and in public. You will see the evidence of that pressure from multiple witnesses, live and on video. Vice President Pence demonstrated his loyalty to Donald Trump consistently over 4 years, but he knew that he had a higher duty to the United States Constitution. This is testimony from the Vice President's Chief of Staff.
Getting testimony.
So I think the Vice President was proud of
great.
His 4 years of service, and he felt like much had been accomplished in those 4 years. And I think he was proud to have stood beside the president for all that had been done. But I think he ultimately knew that his fidelity to the Constitution was his first and foremost oath. And that's what he articulated publicly, and I think that that's what he felt.
His fidelity to the Constitution was more important than his fidelity to President Trump and his desire.
The oath he took. Yep.
Yes.
You'll also hear about a lawyer named John Eastman. Mr. Eastman was deeply involved in President Trump's plans. You'll hear from former Fourth Circuit federal judge Michael Ludig, a highly respected leading conservative judge. John Eastman clerked for Judge Ludig. Judge Ludig provided counsel to the Vice President's team in the days before January 6th. The judge will explain how Eastman, quote, was wrong at every turn. And you will see the email exchanges between Eastman and the Vice President's counsel as the violent attack on Congress was underway. Mr. Jacob said this to Mr. Eastman: "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege." You will also see evidence that John Eastman did not actually believe the legal position he was taking. In fact, a month before the 2020 election, Eastman took exactly the opposite view on the same legal issues. In the course of the Select Committee's work to obtain information from Mr. Eastman, we have had occasion to present evidence to a federal judge. The judge evaluated the facts, and he reached the conclusion that President Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Pence to act illegally by refusing to count electoral votes likely violated 2 federal criminal statutes.
Wow.
And the judge also said this: if Dr. Eastman and President Trump's plan had worked, it would have permanently ended the peaceful transition of power, undermining American democracy and the Constitution. Wow. If the country does not commit to investigating and pursuing accountability for those responsible, the court fears January 6th will repeat itself. Every
Federal
American
judge
should read what
accusing
this
Donald
federal
Trump of
judge has written.
Criminal activity.
The same judge, Judge Carter, issued another decision on Tuesday night, just this week, indicating that John Eastman and other Trump lawyers knew that their legal arguments had no real chance of success in court, but they relied on those arguments anyway to try to, quote, overturn a Democratic election. And you will hear that while Congress was under attack on January 6th and the hours following the violence, the Trump legal team in the Willard Hotel War Room continued to work to halt the count of electoral votes. In our 5th hearing, you will see evidence that President Trump corruptly pressured state legislators and election officials to change election results. You will hear additional details about President Trump's call to Georgia officials, urging them to, quote, find 11,780 votes, votes that did not exist, and his efforts to get states to rescind certified electoral slates without a factual basis and contrary to law. You will hear new details about the Trump campaign.
Well, I don't know what's happening there. That seems to be something on the buffering side. Well, sorry about that. All that's a YouTube problem on the YouTube side. So, Rob, lots of things happening right there.
Yeah. So what Liz Cheney's doing is, besides kind of going through kind of the the IMDb of the of what the hearings are going to be, what she's doing is she's laying out that Donald Trump was lying
to stop
and he
the
knew he was
violence
lying.
and instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol. As we present these initial findings, keep 2 points in mind. First, our investigation is still ongoing, so what we make public here will not be the complete set of information we will ultimately disclose. And second, the Department of Justice is currently working with cooperating witnesses and has disclosed to date only some of the information it has identified from encrypted communications and other sources. On December 18th, 2020, a group, including General Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others, visited the White House. They stayed late into the evening. We know that the group discussed a number of dramatic steps, including having the military seize voting machines and potentially rerun elections. You will also hear that President Trump met with that group alone for a period of time before White House lawyers and other staff discovered the group was there and rushed to intervene. A little more than an hour after Ms. Powell, Mr. Giuliani, General Flynn, and the others finally left the White House, President Trump sent the tweet on the screen now, telling people to come to Washington on January 6th. Be there, he instructed them. We'll be wild. As you will see, this was a pivotal moment. This tweet initiated a chain of events. The tweet led to the planning for what occurred on January 6th, including by the Proud Boys, who ultimately led the invasion of the Capitol and the violence on that day. The indictment of a group of Proud Boys alleges that they planned, quote, to oppose by force the authority of the government of the United States.
Yep.
And according to the Department of Justice, on January 6, 2021, the defendants directed, mobilized, and led members of the crowd onto the Capitol grounds and into the Capitol, leading to the dismantling of metal barricades, the destruction of property, the breaching of the Capitol building, and the assaults on law enforcement. Although certain former Trump officials have argued that they did not anticipate violence on January 6th, the evidence suggests otherwise. As you will see in our hearings, the White House was receiving specific reports in the days leading up to January 6th, including during President Trump's Ellipse rally, indicating that elements in the crowd were preparing for violence at the Capitol. And on the evening of January 5th, the president's close advisor, Steve Bannon, said this on his podcast.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow. Just understand this. All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
As part of our investigation, we will present information about what the White House and other intelligence agencies knew and why the Capitol was not better prepared. But we will not lose sight of the fact that the Capitol Police did not cause the crowd to attack. And we will not blame the violence that day, violence provoked by Donald Trump, on the officers who bravely defended all of us. In our final hearing, you will hear a moment-by-moment account of the hours-long attack from more than half a dozen White House staff, both live in the hearing room and via videotaped testimony. There's no doubt that President Trump was well aware of the violence as it developed. White House staff urged President Trump to intervene and call off the mob. Here is a document written while the attack was underway by a member of the White House staff advising what the president needed to say. Quote, anyone who entered the Capitol without proper authority should leave immediately. This is exactly what his supporters on Capitol Hill and nationwide were urging the president to do.
Unbelievable.
He would not. You will hear that leaders on Capitol Hill begged the president for help, including Republican leader McCarthy, who was, quote, scared, and called multiple members of President Trump's family after he could not persuade the president himself. Not only did President Trump refuse to tell the mob to leave the Capitol, he placed no call to any element of the United States government to instruct that the Capitol be defended. He did not call his Secretary of Defense on January 6th. He did not talk to his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. President Trump gave no order to deploy the National Guard that day, and he made no effort to work with the Department of Justice to coordinate and deploy law enforcement assets.
Sins
But
of
Vice
omission.
President Pence did each of those things. For example, here is what General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified to this committee.
There were two or three calls with Vice President Pence. He was very animated, and he issued very explicit, very direct, unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And he was, and I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller. Get the military down here, get the Guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
By contrast, here is General Milley's description of his conversation with President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on January 6th.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that, that the President is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
Wow.
And you will hear from witnesses how the day played out inside the White House, how multiple White House staff resigned in disgust, and how President Trump would not ask his supporters to leave the Capitol. It was only after multiple hours of violence that President Trump finally released a video instructing the riotous mob to leave. And as he did so, he said to them, quote, "We love you, and you're very special." You will also hear that in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, members of the president's family, White House staff, and others tried to step in to stabilize the situation, quote, to land the plane, before the presidential transition on January 20th. You will hear about members of the Trump cabinet discussing the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment and replacing the President of the United States. Multiple members of President Trump's own cabinet resigned immediately after January 6th. One member of the cabinet suggested that the remaining cabinet officers needed to take a more active role in running the White House and the administration. But most emblematic of those days is this exchange of texts between Sean Hannity and former President Trump's press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany. Sean Hannity wrote, in part, "Key now, no more crazy people, no more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit." Ms. McEnany responded in part, "Love that. That's the playbook." The White House staff knew that President Trump was willing to entertain and use conspiracy theories to achieve his ends. They knew the president needed to be cut off from all of those who had encouraged him. They knew that President Donald Trump was too dangerous to be left alone, at least until he left office on January 20th. These are important facts for Congress and the American people to understand fully. When a president fails to take the steps necessary to preserve our union, or worse, causes a constitutional crisis, we're at a moment of maximum danger for our republic. Some in the White House took responsible steps to try to prevent January 6th. Others egged the president on. Others, who could have acted, refused to do so. In this case, the White House counsel was so concerned about potentially lawless activity that he threatened to resign multiple times. That is exceedingly rare and exceedingly serious. It requires immediate attention, especially when the entire team threatens to resign. However, in the Trump White House, it was not exceedingly rare, and it was not treated seriously. This is a clip of Jared Kushner addressing multiple threats by White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his team of lawyers to resign in the weeks before January 6th.
Jared, are you aware of instances where Pat Cipollone threatened to resign?
I kind of, like I said, my interest at that time was on trying to get as many pardons done. And I know that, he was always, him and the team were always saying, oh, we're going to resign. We're not going to be here if this happens, if that happens. So I kind of took it up to just be whining, to be honest with you.
Whining. There's a reason why people serving in our government take an oath to the Constitution.
Okay.
As our founding fathers recognized, democracy is fragile. People in positions of public trust are duty-bound to defend it, to step forward when action is required. Yeah. In our country, we don't swear an oath to an individual or a political party. We take our oath to defend the United States Constitution. And that oath must mean something. Tonight, I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Wow.
Finally, I ask all of our fellow Americans, as you watch our hearings over the coming weeks, please remember what's at stake. Remember the men and women who have fought and died so that we can live under the rule of law, not the rule of men. I ask you to think of the scene in our Capitol Rotunda on the night of January 6th. There, in a sacred space in our constitutional republic, the place where our presidents lie in state, watched over by statues of Washington and Jefferson, Lincoln and Grant, Eisenhower, Ford, and Reagan. Against every wall that night encircling the room, there were SWAT teams, men and women in tactical gear with long guns, deployed inside our Capitol building. There in the rotunda, these brave men and women rested beneath paintings depicting the earliest scenes of our republic, including one painted in 1824 depicting George Washington resigning his commission, voluntarily relinquishing power, handing control of the Continental Army back to Congress. With this noble act, Washington set the indispensable example of the peaceful transfer of power. what President Reagan called nothing less than a miracle. The sacred obligation to defend this peaceful transfer of power has been honored by every American president, except one. As Americans, we all have a duty to ensure that what happened on January 6th never happens again, to set aside partisan battles, to stand together to perpetuate and preserve our great republic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wow, that was stunning.
Incredible.
As we provide answers to American
50 minutes of setup.
about
Great.
January 6th, it's important that we remember exactly what took place. That this was no tourist visit to the Capitol. Most of the footage we are about to play has never been seen. The Select Committee obtained it as a part of our investigation. This isn't easy to watch. I want to warn everyone that this video includes violence and strong language. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation of the violence of January 6th.
Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy! Proud of your boy!
Yeah, just for awareness, be advised, there's probably about 300 Proud Boys. They're marching eastbound in this 400 block of kind of Independence, actually on the mall towards the United States Capitol.
Just the worst.
I am not allowed to say what's going to happen today because everyone's just going to have to watch for themselves.
Whoa.
But it's going to happen. Something's going to happen.
Who's free? Our streets! Who's free? Our streets! Who's free? Our streets! We are on your side. Don't make us go against you. Understand the side. Pick a side. These are our streets.
No, they're not.
I hope Mike is going to do the right thing. I hope so. I hope so. Because if Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. All Vice President Pence has to do is send it back to the states.
All he had to do was win the election if he wanted to win the election. He lost the election because of him.
And you are the happiest people.
You know, it's one thing, I don't want to interrupt the committee too much, but interrupting Donald Trump.
And if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country. Because you'll never, ever take back.
He is a sad day for our country.
You have to show strength, and you have
Just so tired of having to litigate over and over the damage this man has done to this country. It's just exhausting.
Cruiser 50, it does look like we're going to have an ad hoc march stepping off here. There's a crowd surge heading east.
We love Trump! 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 We love Trump!
Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now.
Just the narcissism. Yeah.
Get back, ladies! Get back, ladies!
The back the blue folks completely ignoring the piece.
Breach the line. We need backup.
I know she's said that Liz Cheney said they're not going to spend their time critiquing the preparation because you need to stay focused here. But the fact that there wasn't preparation for this is so unacceptable.
And the United States Senate.
These rioters and insurrectionists should have been met with the kind of response that our country deserves. And there's some reason they didn't happen. And
We're going to give riot warnings. As soon as the apparatus here, we're going to give riot warnings.
the Capitol Police shouldn't have to put up with this.
But this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
At 1:46, they've already declared it's a riot.
Police one advised they're trying to breach and get to the Capitol.
I copy.
I mean, these poor Capitol Police having to.
We're about 5 miles out. We're trying to make our way through all this.
This is why we all need to organize, call our friends, get out, and have a march on the voting booth in November. This November will be the first election since this is what Republicans chose to support.
See the first guy in?
Yeah. Might be the last guy out of jail, too.
Breach of the Capitol to the upper level.
Be advised, they're requesting additional resources on the east side as they've broken into that window and they're trying to kick it in.
I've been there many times, know exactly what the situation is, and the fact these people would just break the doors,
Without
break the
objection, the chair
windows
declares the House in recess pursuant to Clause 12B of Rule 1.
in order to stop the government from functioning.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify.
This is
U.S.
huge.
demands the truth. Bring out Pence. Bring out Pence. Bring out Pence.
Listen, an impromptu event, like, you don't bring the stuff to make a gallows for an impromptu event.
That's right.
It's not something
Good
you just
point.
have laying around.
I hope they talk about in the committee here that the White House did not allow for the use of the military to be at this January 6th Capitol building. Oh, it's just heartbreaking.
We can't hold this. We're gonna get too many fucking people. Look at this fucking vantage point, man. We're fucked.
We need an
hard
area
to
for
watch,
the
but you can't
House
look away.
members. They're all walking over now through the tunnels.
These are Congress people and senators running for their safety because Trump supporters are attacking the Capitol.
We need to
So this is
the Capitol.
on January 6th. I just looked up. I sent this text to a congressperson that I'm friends with. I said, "Love you, praying for you. Be safe. We need your leadership." And at 3:51 on January 6th, he replied, "Thanks, brother. Love you too, man. And thank God I'm safe." That's coming from a congressman who was there.
Yeah.
Like this, they were scared for their lives.
Yes. So there they're calling for Nancy Pelosi, as you can hear. Seems to be a buffering issue again with YouTube. Not entirely sure why that is. What's happening on the C-SPAN side of the YouTube channel here? Just so, Rob, it's really just overwhelmingly bad what's happening. You know, when you see this happen all over again.
208 with 4 members. Doors barricaded. There's people flooded the hallways.
It's important not
outside.
to
We have
look
no way
away,
out.
but it's so hard to watch.
In fact, officers still remaining on the House floor
on the third floor to use the subway themselves.
Look at that.
To evacuate so we can secure the members on the other side. Copy.
Secret Service with guns out, trying to protect elected officials from rioting mobs sent by the President of the United States.
One more time. I'll tell you ready to do. And whatever it takes, I'll lay my life down if it takes. Absolutely. That's why we showed up today. Hey!
We're coming in if you don't bring her out, talking about Nancy Pelosi.
I mean, just imagine that again. These are people whose assumption is that they get what they want.
Yeah.
They'll say it over and over. They felt they were sent by the president. That's why they had the authority to do what they're doing. That's been the stated line of so many of these people in court and other places. And as Wendy points out in the chat, we don't have laws that call this terrorism. Some of us need to know that our laws in the United States, for a lot of really good reasons, only allow foreign actors to be considered terrorists. So that's an issue that has to be addressed if these kinds of things are not dealt with in other means. It's really a conundrum.
I read earlier today that at this point, I think 800 people have been arrested for their involvement in the events of January 6th. And the article that I read mentioned that it's the largest dragnet in Justice Department history.
Wow.
As we're watching a Capitol Police officer being beaten.
These were great people.
Yeah, it's calling great people.
Unbelievable. And I mentioned the word love. The love in the air. I've never seen anything like it.
Christian flag there with.
I'm sure they're back.
Trump
yeah, the Christian flag there. Yeah.
That. Yeah, this was as
Pursuant
much
to
about
the
Christian
order
nationalism
of
as
the committee
anything else.
of tonight, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, so they're going into recess. This gives us a chance to sort of catch up. Thanks all for being a part of this. Apologize for what we saw, for having the audio be a problem earlier, but I'm sure you had a chance to hear that. If you're just joining us, the first now hour and 1 minute has been an opening statement from Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee. He talked about his own history, about the connection between this and other times when violence was perceived as justified by people in the United States. And then Congresswoman Cheney articulated very clearly what they're going to be arguing over the next, whatever it is, 5 hearings that are going to take place. It's almost like laying out a preview, structuring it so that people know what to look forward to. There was some new information to me about who had said what, all the way from family members to Mike Pence's staff to some of the things that the former Attorney General Bill Barr has already said were out in the public. But they're laying these things out in a way that builds a case. And Rob, I wasn't writing down all the days and the arguments he was making. I don't know if you or others in the chat were keeping track of that, but they were basically saying, here's what you're going to see with this hearing, and then at the next hearing you're going to see this, and the next hearing you're going to see that. Yeah,
laying out the kind of the episodic nature of how these hearings are going to go, which is just a fascinating thing, in this day and age, that this is how this is playing
Yeah,
out.
you're saying
Doug,
like episodes of a season. Yeah, I thought the same thing. It was sort of like they were starting to say tune in next week for this and that. And I'm glad they did, because it felt like, okay, this isn't just going to be the ins and outs of which you typically get in congressional hearings, which, by the way, congressional hearings are meant to be mundane. They're meant to be the slow work of the government, right? They're not supposed to have to deal with insurrections and with presidents violating their oaths of office. Like this apparatus is not great for the apparatus we have for dealing with this, which is select committees and Justice Department. We don't have a system to deal with presidents that go rogue. We've been saying that, around here for the full 4 years of the Trump administration, that our country gives so much leeway to the president between the separations of powers and just tradition. We give so much leeway that bad people are able to accomplish extraordinarily bad things as president, and there's very little to nothing we can do about it. So we cannot think that we're going to save ourselves from bad presidents by some impeachment or by some congressional action or by judges. We have to elect people who are not criminally bad people.
Yes. Yeah. So a couple of things, that I noticed from this first hour. I was not expecting video or audio from the testimonies that were given to the committee in their investigative stage. That comes as a surprise to me and a welcome one, because that so often people would, their response would be, oh no, I didn't say that. And it becomes a he said, she said kind of thing. But with this video and audio evidence, there's, you can't wiggle your way out of that. And so, whether or not Bill Barr or Ivanka Trump or any of these folks are willing to come and testify at these hearings, we in essence have their testimony through the audio and video from their deposition. So that is really interesting, and something that I'm really happy to see. The other thing that comes to mind is, listen, I don't know what kind of impact this is going to have in the court of public opinion. Is this going to sway people? My guess is there's the people that like Benjamin, who just said that he's so sick of hearing about January 6th. Nobody cares that, like,
I do. One person. Nobody plus one.
Right.
I'm the plus one to nobody.
Yeah,
I care.
I have been saying for a long time that we are not going to get over it until there's justice, because it's just
and this is it's a tragedy that we should never get over. That's right.
I'm not sure this is going to have much impact in the court of public opinion. I hope it will, but I'm not sure it will. I don't think that's the point. The point, like, Donald Trump is, based on what we've seen already in the first hour of this, I feel like they are laying the case that Donald Trump is in serious legal jeopardy, not in the court of public opinion, but in the court of law. When you have a federal judge saying it appears as if Donald Trump, committed crimes, there is, the upshot of this might not sway public opinion at all, but it might land some people in jail.
Yeah. Well, look, whether or not it changes people's minds who don't care, I can see that. But I'm glad that, someone like Benjamin Craig in our chat, who says no one cares, is actually watching this. Appreciate that. Stick around. The people who do care need to know this. Like, one of the things that about how movements happen, how things change, is that the people who care need to care a little more. And sometimes if someone just doesn't care about something, it does no good to try to get them to care about something they don't care about, right? You and I have been pastors for decades. Yes. We know trying to convince people to care about things they should care about doesn't work. But people who are open to caring about it, a lot of times people don't know, so they don't care. Sometimes they don't care, so they choose not to know. I think there's enough here to move the margins of people who are sort of in that place of like, well, I'm not sure we should make such a big deal out of it. Well, when something like this takes place, and I will just simply say to every Republican, and share this with Republicans that if you seemingly feel like, I don't think I care about this because this is the other side coming after my people. If it had been Barack Obama who did not want to turn over the presidency to Donald Trump, and these things happened with Obama supporters, do you think you would say it's no big deal, I would sit it out? Now, I know I would not. If Barack Obama supporters had attacked the Capitol, if all this had just been reversed and the president that I supported and voted for had acted in these ways, and all of this was just switch teams, and I know Republicans, you would too. You would care. So the reason you don't care is either because you just simply don't care about the government. Look, and I get it. There's a lot of anarchists who just don't care about this stuff at all. But to Republicans who say that they care, to the Congress people who are elected as Republicans, to the senators, to the former people, all the people, you would care if the situation were turned.
Yes.
Yes. And look, if you don't care, if you don't care about the suffering of a democracy, well, God bless you. You know, no, don't want to disturb you from your slumber. Because there's no alarm clock. There's no alarm clock loud enough, Rob, to wake someone from a fake sleep. So if you don't care,
well said.
Thank you. It's a good line.
Yeah, I just want to underscore something that Liz Cheney said. You know, those who are saying that this is, you know, a partisan committee, it's not. There are two Republicans on this committee. Liz Cheney, who spent the better part of an hour talking and laying out the case against former President Donald Trump and his associates, is a Republican. She is the daughter of Dick Cheney. Come on, this is, you know, to paraphrase the church world, this is a Republican of the Republicans. You know, like this is as Republican as you get, Liz Cheney. She turned to her Republican colleagues and said, someday Donald Trump will be gone, but your dishonor will remain. Wow.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Benjamin.
Let's not talk about Benjamin. Let's just leave Mr. Benjamin to himself.
For Donald Trump in 2020.
That's right. Benjamin, glad to have you here, but thanks. Hey, look, these kinds of actions where the government has to report to the American people don't happen very often.
Right.
A lot of us were really bothered by how much time and energy was spent with the Benghazi thing. But look, all in all, a consulate in Libya was attacked and it should have been investigated. I'm glad that it was. I think they did it in a way I wouldn't have approved of. I think they had political agenda to it, but it was the right thing to do. This is the right thing to do. Our government needs to step up and pay attention to these things when they happen. All right, we're going to turn this audio back on. Let's hope that all works.
The committee will be in order.
There we go.
I want to thank our witnesses for being with us this evening to share their firsthand accounts of that terrible day. I know that some of the witnesses from our first hearing are in the room with us, along with some of the family members, friends, and widows of the officers who lost their lives as a result of the attack. Thank you all for being here for us and the American people. Officer Carolyn Edwards has been with the United States Capitol Police since 2017. On January 6th, Officer Edwards was assigned to the First Responder Unit, which serves as the first line of defense at the Capitol complex. She also served as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit, a special subset of the uniformed division trained to respond to mass demonstration events. Officer Edwards is a graduate of the University of Georgia and currently is working on a master's degree in intelligence analysis from Johns Hopkins University. Nick Quistad is an acclaimed filmmaker whose credits include documenting stories from war zones in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. On January 6th, Mr. Quickstead was working on a documentary about, quote, why Americans are so divided when Americans have so much in common, end quote. During that day, Mr. Quested interviewed and documented movements of the people around the Capitol, including the first moments of the violence against the Capitol Police and the chaos that ensued. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise your right hand.
You know, this is a good reminder that this is not just a television report.
You swear
It's
and
technically
affirm under
a congressional
penalty of
hearing.
perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Without objection, the witness's statement will be included in the record. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I recognize myself for questioning.
Such a great
As
thing
you
in these
saw
hearings. I
just
recognize
a few
myself.
minutes ago, the Proud Boys instigated the first breach of the Capitol just before 1:00 p.m., where rioters pushed over barricades near the Peace Circle at the foot of the Capitol. Our two witnesses tonight were both there at the time of that first breach. Officer Edwards was standing with other officers behind a line of bike racks that marked the perimeter of the Capitol grounds. She bravely tried to prevent an angry crowd from advancing on the Capitol. Unfortunately, she was overrun and knocked unconscious as the crowd advanced on the Capitol. Mr. Quickstead was a few yards away from Officer Edwards, taking footage of the Proud Boys as part of his work on a documentary film. Most of his footage has never been shown publicly before we shared it this evening. Officer Edwards, I'd like to start by asking if you could tell us why you believe it's important for you to share your story this evening with the committee and the American public. Please,
Okay, that's on there.
your
Ann.
microphone.
Your mute is on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it, and thank you to the committee for having me here to testify. I was called a lot of things on January 6, 2021, and the days thereafter. I was called Nancy Pelosi's dog, called incompetent, called a hero, and a villain. I was called a traitor to my country, my oath, and my Constitution. In actuality, I was none of those things. I was an American, standing face to face with other Americans, asking myself how many times, many times, how we had gotten here. I had been called names before, but never had my patriotism or duty been called into question. I, who got up every day, no matter how early the hour or how late I got in the night before, to put on my uniform and to protect America's symbol of democracy. I, who spent countless hours in the baking sun and freezing snow to make sure that America's elected officials were able to do their job. I, whose literal blood, sweat, and tears were shed that day defending the building that I spent countless holidays and weekends working in. I am the proud granddaughter of a Marine that fought in the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir in the Korean War. I think of my papa often in these days, how he was so young and thrown into a battle he never saw coming and answered the call at a great personal cost. How he lived the rest of his days with bullets and shrapnel in his legs, but never once complained about his sacrifice. I would like to think that he would be proud of me, proud of his granddaughter that stood her ground that day and continued fighting, even though she was wounded, like he did many years ago. Yep. I am my grandfather's granddaughter, proud to put on a uniform and serve my country. They dared to question my honor. They dared to question my loyalty. and they dared to question my duty. I'm a proud American, and I will gladly sacrifice everything to make sure that the America my grandfather defended is here for many years to come. Thank you.
Officer Edwards, your story and your service is important, and I thank you for being here tonight. Mrs. Quickstead, I also like to ask you to introduce yourself. Can you tell us how you found yourself in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021?
Good evening, Chair and Madam Vice Chair. Thank you for the introduction. As stated in the winter of 2020, I was working on a documentary. As part of that documentary, I filmed several rallies in Washington, D.C. on December the 11th and December the 12th. And I learned there would be a rally on the Mall on January 6th. So my 3 colleagues and I came down to document the rally. According to the permit of the event, there was going to be a rally at the Ellipse. We arrived at the Mall and observed a large contingent of Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol. We filmed them, and almost immediately I was separated from my colleagues. I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities. I'm here today pursuant to a House subpoena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Quested. The Select Committee has conducted extensive investigative work to understand what led the Proud Boys and other rioters to the Capitol on January 6th. We've obtained substantial evidence showing that the president's December 19th tweet calling his followers to Washington, D.C. on January 6th energized individuals from the Proud Boys and other extremist groups. I'd like to play a brief video highlighting some of this evidence.
My name is Marcus Childress, and I'm an investigative counsel for the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol.
What do you want to call them? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by.
After he made this comment, Enrique Terrio, then chairman of the Proud Boys, said on Parler, "Standing by, sir." During our investigation, we learned that this comment during the presidential debate actually led to an increase in membership from the Proud Boys.
Would you say that Proud Boys numbers increased after the stand back, stand by comment?
Exponentially. I'd say tripled probably, with the potential for a lot more eventually.
And did you ever sell any stand back and stand by merchandise?
One of the vendors on my page actually beat me to it, but I wish I would have made a stand back, stand by shirt.
On December 19th, President Trump tweeted about the January 6th rally and told attendees, "Be there, we'll be wild." Many of the witnesses that we interviewed were inspired by the president's call and came to DC for January 6th. But the extremists, they took it a step further. They viewed this tweet as a call to arms. A day later, the Department of Justice describes how the Proud Boys created a chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense Leadership Chat. In this chat, the Proud Boys established a command structure in anticipation of coming back to DC on January 6th. The Department of Justice describes Mr. Tarrio coming into possession of a document called the 1776 Returns, which describes individuals occupying key buildings around the United States Capitol. The Oath Keepers are another group that the committee investigated.
You better get your ass to D.C., folks, this Saturday.
Yeah, if you don't, there'll be no more Republic. But we're not going to let that happen. It's not even an if. It's either President Trump is encouraged and bolstered, strengthened to do what he must do, or we wind up in a bloody fight. We all know that. The fight's coming.
The Oath Keepers began planning to block the peaceful transfer of power shortly after the November 3rd election. And according to the Department of Justice, Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers leader, said to his followers that we were not going to get through this without a civil war. In response to the December 19th, 2020 tweet by President Trump, the Oath Keepers focused on January 6th in Washington, D.C. In response to the tweet, one member, the president of the Florida chapter, put on social media, "The president called us to the Capitol. He wants us to make it wild." The goal was for the Oath Keepers to be called to duty so that they could keep the president in power, although President Trump had just lost the election. The committee learned that the Oath Keepers set up quick reaction forces outside of the city in Virginia where they stored arms. The goal of these quick reaction forces was to be on standby just in case President Trump invoked the Insurrection Act.
Did the Oath Keepers ever provide weapons to members?
I'm going to decline to answer that and put them at grounds for due process grounds.
In footage obtained by the committee, we learned that on the night of January 5th, Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes met in a parking garage in Washington, D.C.
There's mutual respect there. I think we're fighting the same fight, and I think that's what's important.
The committee learned that the Oath Keepers went into the Capitol through the east doors in 2 stack formations. The DOJ alleges that one of the stacks went into the Capitol looking for Speaker Pelosi, although they never found her. As the attack was unfolding, Mr. Tarrio testified. In documents obtained by the Department of Justice, Mr. Tarrio said in an encrypted chat, "Make no mistake, and we did this." Later on that evening, Mr. Tarrio even posted a video which seemed to resemble him in front of the Capitol with a black cape, and the title of the video was Premonition. The evidence developed by the Select Committee and the Department of Justice highlights how each group participated on the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. In fact, the investigation revealed that it was individuals associated with the Proud Boys who instigated the initial breach at the Peace Circle at 12:53 p.m.
This is important.
Within 10
They're
minutes,
pinning this on
rioters
the
had already
Proud
filled
Boys,
the
not
Lower
just
West Plaza.
random people.
Yeah.
By 2 o'clock, rioters had reached the doors on the west and the east plazas. And by 2:13, rioters had actually broken through the Senate wing door and gotten into the Capitol building. A series of breaches followed. At 2:25 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors to the rotunda. And then right after 2:40 p.m., rioters breached the east side doors near the Ways and Means room. Once the rioters infiltrated the Capitol, they moved through the crypt, the rotunda, the hallways leading to the House chambers, and even inside the Senate chambers.
Individuals associated with 2 violent extremist groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy in connection with the January 6th attack. One is the Oath Keepers. They are a group of armed anti-government extremists. The other group is the Proud Boys. They promote white supremacist beliefs and have engaged in violence with people they view as their political enemies. Members of both groups have already pled guilty to crimes associated with the January 6th attack. Mr. Quested, as part of the documentary you've been filming, you gained access to the Proud Boys and their leader, Enrique Tarrio. Your crew filmed them in Washington, D.C. on the evening of January 5th and then on January 6th. On January 5th, the night before the attack, you were with the head of the Proud Boys, Mr. Tarrio, in Washington, D.C. What happened?
We picked up Mr. Tarrio from jail. He'd been arrested for carrying some magazines, some extra capacity magazines, and he took responsibility for the burning of the Black Lives Matter flag that was stolen from the church on December the 12th. We were attempting to get an interview with Mr. Tarrio. We had no idea of any of the events that were going to subsequently happen. We drove him to pick up his bags from the property department of the police, which is just south of the mall. We picked up his bags and went to get some other bags from the Phoenix Hotel. We encountered Mr. Stuart Rhodes from the Oath Keepers. By the time I'd gone to park the car, my colleague was saying, who'd got into the car with Mr. Tarrio, that they had moved to a location around the corner, the parking garage of the Hall of Legends, I believe. And so we quickly drove over there. We drove down into the parking garage and filmed the scene of Mr. Tarrio and Mr. Rhodes and certain other individuals in that garage. We then continued to follow Mr. Tarrio. There was some discussion about where he was going to go. He ended up going towards a hotel in Baltimore, and we conducted an interview with him in the hotel room. And then we returned to DC for that night. And what was interesting that night, actually, was that was the first indication that DC was much more busy than it had been any other time we'd been here, because we couldn't get into the hotels we wanted to, and we ended up at a hotel that, you know, was not as satisfactory as we would hoped.
Thank you. So
plan ahead.
What you're saying is you filmed the meeting between Mr. Tarrio and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rose, right?
Indeed.
You couldn't hear what was said, but according to the Justice Department indictment of Mr. Tarrio, a participant referenced the Capitol. Now, on the morning of January 6th, you learned the Proud Boys would gather near the rally scheduled to take place near the White House. What time did you meet up with the Proud Boys, and what was happening when they met?
We met up with the Proud Boys somewhere around 10:30 a.m., and they were starting to walk down the mall easterly direction towards the Capitol. There was a large contingent, more than I had expected, and I was confused to a certain extent why we were walking away from the president's speech, because that's what I felt we were there to cover.
So at 10:30 a.m., that's early in the day. That's even before President Trump had started speaking. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
So how many Proud Boys would you estimate were marching together to the Capitol?
A couple of hundred, potentially. Yeah, I'd say a couple of hundred Proud Boys were marching towards the Capitol at that point.
At the time, was the area heavily guarded?
No, that was, I remember we walked we walked down the mall, we walked to the right of the reflecting pool, and then north along the road that leads to the Peace Circle. And as we were walking past the Peace Circle, I framed the Proud Boys to the right of my shot with the Capitol behind, and we see one sole police officer at the barriers, which subsequently breached. We then walk up and past a tactical unit preparing, and you see that in the film where the man questions their duty and their honor, and you see maybe a dozen Capitol Police putting on their riot gear.
So how would you describe the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere it seemed to be much darker. I make efforts to create a familiarity between myself and my subjects to, make them feel comfortable. And the atmosphere was much darker this day than had been in these other days. And there was also a contingent of Proud Boys that I hadn't met before from Arizona who appeared to wear these orange hats and had orange armbands.
So when the Proud Boys went back down the hill to the Peace Circle, did a larger crowd start together?
Well, no. First of all, we went round to the back and down the steps, and we took some photographs on the east side of the Capitol, and then we went for lunch. We went for tacos.
Wow.
So, Mr. Quested, you're a journalist, so you're careful to stick to things that you have observed. But what you've told us is highly relevant.
While you're kind of handling the buffering issue, Doug, let me just read a tweet that someone just sent out. It says, "It's a special kind of stupid to bring a British documentarian with you when you're committing crimes against the state."
Yeah,
President Trump's speech. We know this because they left that area to march toward the Capitol before the speech began. They walked around the Capitol that morning. I'm concerned this allowed them to see what defenses were in place and where weaknesses might be. And they decided to launch their attack at the Peace Circle, which is the front door of the Capitol complex. It's the first security perimeter that those marching from the ellipse would have to come to as they moved toward the Capitol. The Peace Circle walkway was always where the thousands of angry Trump supporters would arrive after President Trump sent them from the ellipse. The Proud Boys timed their attack to the moments before the start of the joint session in the Capitol, which is also where President Trump directed the angry mob, quote, "We fight like hell," end quote. He told them before sending them down Pennsylvania Avenue, right to where the Proud Boys gathered and where you were filming. Now, a central question is whether the attack on the Capitol was coordinated and planned. What you witnessed is what a coordinated and planned effort would look like. It was the culmination of a months-long effort spearheaded by President Trump. Wow. Mr. Quested, thank you for your eyewitness account of the lead up to the breach of the Peace Circle. This brings us to a point in time where you and Officer Edwards were in close proximity. At this point, I reserve the balance of my time pursuant to 5C, Section 8 of House Resolution 503. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Officer Edwards, I want to start by thanking you for your service and thank you for your courage. Thank you for being here this evening. I know that it's not easy to relive what happened for you and for the officers behind you and for the family members of officers in the audience this evening.
Listen, I'm not a big fan of Liz Cheney.
It's really important for the country
coming off
to have a full accounting.
This.
She knows what she's doing.
I want to start, Officer Edwards, with a short clip that shows the horrible moment when you were injured as the Peace Circle was breached.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Officer Edwards, can you describe the crowd that had assembled at the Peace Circle as you and your fellow officers stood behind and guarded the bike racks at the Peace Circle?
Yes, so
Doug, they're using
there were
the
about,
little mic covers
I want
like
to
we
say
did
about 5 of us on that line. And there was our bike rack, and then at the bottom of the Pennsylvania Avenue walkway, or right by Peace Circle, there was another bike rack. And so the crowd had kind of gathered there. It was the crowd led by Joseph Biggs, and they were mostly in civilian clothes. There were some who had military fatigues on. We could see people with bulletproof vests on, things like that. They didn't seem, extremely cohesive, but they had gathered there in their outfits, but they had gathered there together, and Joseph Biggs started, he had a megaphone, and he started talking about, first things kind of relating to Congress. And then the tables started turning once the, what is now the Arizona group is what you said, the crowd with orange hats, they came up chanting F-U-C-K, Antifa, and they joined that group. And once they joined that group, Joseph Biggs' rhetoric turned to the Capitol Police. He started asking us questions like, you didn't miss a paycheck during the pandemic. Mentioning stuff about our pay scale was mentioned.
Right.
And, you know, started turning the tables on us. And I've worked, I can, you know, conservatively say probably hundreds of civil disturbance events. I know when I'm being turned into a villain, and that's when I turned to my sergeant and I stated the understatement of the century. I said, Sarge, I think we're gonna need a few more people down here. And so after that, you know, I think they started conferring. They went a little silent. They started conferring among each other. I saw the person now identified as Ryan Samsel. He put his arm around Joseph Biggs, and they were talking, and then they started approaching the first barricade. They ripped the first barricade down, and they approached our bike racks. You know, at that time, we started holding on, grabbing the bike racks. You know, there weren't many of us, so I grabbed the middle between two different bike racks. And, you know, I wasn't under any pretense that I could hold it for very long, but I just wanted to, you know, make sure that we could get more people down and get our CDU units time to answer the call. So we started grappling over the bike racks. I felt the bike rack come on top of my head, and I was pushed backwards, and my foot caught the stair behind me, and my chin hit the handrail, and then at that point I had blacked out, but the back of my head clipped the concrete stairs behind me.
And you were knocked unconscious, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am.
But then when you regained consciousness, even with the injuries, you returned to duty, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. You know, at that time, adrenaline kicked in. I ran towards the West Front, and I tried to hold the line at the Senate steps at the Lower West Terrace. More people kept coming at us. It just seemed like, you know, more and more people started, you know, coming onto the West Front. They started overpowering us. And that was right about when MPD's officers showed up. Their bike officers pushed the crowd back and allowed our CDU units as well as theirs to form that line that you see, that very thin line between us and the protesters or the rioters. You know, at that time, I fell behind that line, and for a while I started decontaminating people who had gotten sprayed and treating people medically who needed it.
And then you were injured again there on the West Terrace, is that right, Officer Edwards?
Yes, ma'am. So after a while, I got back on the line. It was on the house side of the Lower West Terrace. And I was holding that line for a while. There weren't many of us over there. And Officer Sicknick was behind me for most of the time, for about 30 to 45 minutes that I was down there. We were just, as the best we could, we were just, grappling over bike racks and trying to hold them as quick as possible.
Tan suit crew there.
All of a sudden, I see movement to the left of me, and I turned, and it was Officer Sicknick with his head in his hands. And he was ghostly pale, which I figured at that point that he had been sprayed, and I was concerned. My, cop alarm bells went off, because if you get sprayed with pepper spray, you're going to turn red. He turned just about as pale as this sheet of paper. And so I looked back to see what had hit him, what had happened, and that's when I got sprayed in the eyes as well. I was taken to be decontaminated by another officer, but we didn't get the chance because we were then tear gassed.
Yeah.
And we are going to play just a brief clip of that moment that you've just described, Officer Edwards.
Oh, anybody can continue to support Trump voters and Trump seditionists is amazing.
Officer Edwards, I just
their
want to
due process
thank you
is not being
for being
followed.
here.
People argue. So ridiculous.
And I know, again, how difficult it is. I know the family of Officer Sicknick as well, who's here tonight. And one of the things one of the Capitol Police officers said to me recently was to ask me whether or not, as members of Congress, all of us understood that on that day, on January 6th, when we were evacuated from the chamber, were led to a safe, undisclosed location, whether we knew that so many of you had rushed out of the building and into the fight. And I can assure you that we do know that, and that we understand how important your service is. Thank you for your continued work with our committee and the interviews, and thank you very much for both of you for being here this evening. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Edwards,
Everybody needs someone who will just rub them on the shoulders like that.
give us one memory of that awful day that stands out most vividly in your mind?
I can. That time when I talked about falling behind MPD's line, I remember because I had been kind of shielded away because I was holding those stairs, so I wasn't able to really see what was going on over here. When I fell behind that line and I can just remember my breath catching in my throat because what I saw was just a war scene. It was something like I'd seen out of the movies. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were officers on the ground, they were bleeding, they were throwing up, they were, they had, I saw friends with blood all over their faces. I was slipping in people's blood. I was catching people as they fell. It was carnage. It was chaos. I can't even describe what I saw. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer, I would find myself in the middle of a battle. You know, I'm trained to detain, you know, a couple of subjects and handle a crowd, but I'm not combat trained.
Yeah.
And that day, it was just hours of hand-to-hand combat, hours of dealing with things that were way beyond any law enforcement officer has ever trained for. And I just remember that moment of stepping behind the line and just seeing the absolute war zone that the West Front had become.
Let me thank you for your service and obviously your bravery that you have told the world about tonight. It's unfortunate that you had to defend the Capitol from fellow Americans. None of us would ever think that that would have to happen, but it did. So let me thank our witnesses for joining us tonight and sharing their experiences with America. Throughout my chairmanship of this committee, I've continuously vowed that this committee will ensure a comprehensive account of the heroic acts on January 6th, and that we will follow the facts wherever they lead. Your testimony is an essential part of that record and helps us do our job. Mr. Quested, thank you for sharing your footage and your account of the day's events with us. The images you recorded and have shared with the committee do a better job than any of our words in reinforcing the violence of January 6th. We hope that the power of your footage helped encourage all Americans to consider how citizens with so much in common could viciously brawl at the seat of their democratic government. Officer Edwards, thank you for your brave service, as I indicated, on January 6th, and all you did to protect us, and most importantly, our democracy. If you and your fellow officers hadn't held the line against those violent insurrectionists, we can only imagine the disaster that would have ensued. Your heroism in the face of danger is admirable, and your will to continue to protect and serve despite your serious injuries should be an inspiration to all of us. We wish you a continued recovery and look forward to seeing you back in uniform sometime soon.
Wow.
The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for tonight's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. Without objections, members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The witnesses have just told us what they heard the rioters saying while they stormed the Capitol on that day. Now we're going to hear it from the rioters themselves. Without objection, I include in the record a video presentation.
Yep.
What really made me want to come was the fact that, you know, I had supported Trump all that time. I did believe, you know, that the election was being stolen, and Trump asked us to come.
He personally asked for us to come to D.C. that day. And I thought, for everything he's done for us, if this is the only thing he's going to ask of me, I'll do it.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
Did you recall President Trump mentioning going to the Capitol during his speech?
Oh, yeah. So that's one of my disappointments. He said he was going to go with us, that he was going to be there.
I know why I was there, and that's because he called me there, and he laid out what is happening in our government. He laid it out.
But I remember Donald Trump telling people to be there, right? I mean, to support.
So you mentioned that the president asked you. Do you remember a specific message Basically, yeah, he asked for us to come to D.C., that big things are going to happen.
What got me interested, he said, I have something very important to say on January 6th or something like that, is what got me interested to be there.
You know, Trump has only asked me for two things. He asked me for my vote, and he asked me to come on January 6th.
Oh, I'm sure he's asked you for money too.
Yeah, if you're on his email list like I am.
When the committee reconvenes next week, we're going to examine the lies that convinced those men and others to storm the Capitol, to try to stop the transfer of power. We're going to take a close look at the first part of Trump's attack on the rule of law, when he hit the fuse that ultimately resulted in the violence of January 6th. Without objection, and with that, the committee stands adjourned.
Wow.
Wow.
Okay, Rob. Well, there we go.
Just really, I mean, remarkable. Wow.
Yeah, I'm
just
gonna try
really
to get this.
remarkable sense of what took place, why it took place, and the just the really clear evidence that has been compiled by the committee.
Yeah.
You have the sense of like, these are competent people who aren't messing around.
That's right.
And that does not bode well for the former president of the United States, who has, tied himself to the likes of Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and, other
types,
not nearly as professional kind of, lawyers. I was deeply impressed with the clarity of the evidence as presented and the ability to craft the narrative like we discussed earlier.
Yeah. Hey, now I'd love to have anybody who's still on the chat here to keep chatting. And if you've signed up already for this, you got here because you signed up, you got an email, you already have a link. If you click that link, that'll let you come on here if you want to add your voice into these conversations as we go. Well, I'll tell you what, ma'am, that was, as you said, it was heavy and should be. By the way, if anybody's still watching, you haven't gone down that subscribe button, please do it. It really means a lot to us.
Smash that subscribe button.
Literally. No, yeah. Smash it, push it, bop it, boop it, click it, poke it. What do we got to do? We're going to send out a lot of material using this channel. That's partly why we need it. We're also, there's lots of things that the algorithm of YouTube does when people respond, and that's a big way that they do. So it really helps us out. It rode the line, I thought, really appropriately, felt good that it was a congressional hearing.
Yep.
People were trying to say, oh, this is going to turn into, some big circus and, it's going to be just chaos and it's going to be all Hollywood produced. We even joked about it at the beginning, that they went off and hired somebody that has all the ability to put together a Nightline episode. But it didn't feel that way. It didn't feel like it was unprofessional. It didn't feel like it was a circus. Interesting that it was only Chairman Thompson and Cheney, Representative Cheney, Vice Chair Cheney, I guess, for this committee. They're the only ones who spoke. The other members were there in attendance, but didn't take a role. I'm sure they will in the subsequent meetings. Yeah. But that was also intriguing, right? That they framed it that way, and that I felt that Bernie Representative Thompson was the most. He was gentle. He's a kind man. I thought that was interesting. He really showed compassion and not that Liz Cheney wasn't, but Liz Cheney was just like, and now we're going to get down to business. And this happened and this happened. Like she was prosecutorial. And he was sort of, hey, this happened to our country and her. I thought that was interesting. I just thought it was a really such an interesting way to to craft it. You know, that they didn't. There was no hype to it. What they said, all that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I think, you know, this sets the stage for these hearings to be taken seriously.
That's
You
right.
can't, you know, I saw, you know, during the course of the hearings, I saw that somebody had, you know, had asked Ted Cruz if he was going to watch, and he said, you know, he'd rather watch paint dry than watch the hearings. Like, so that, like, they're trying
Real
to
professional,
dismiss
man. Real professional. You know, it's like you're a senator. This is the House, and you're just like, I have no interest what they're doing. It's unbelievable. Yeah, you know what
But, I
those
mean,
guys
so
should
they're
say really is
trying
they
to
should
be
say, no, this is really serious business. They're not taking it seriously. Like this kind of like, oh, I got so many better things to do. I mean, it's just, I know what they're doing. They're trying to give people who are trying to say, I couldn't care less about this support because they want people to think they don't care about it. I just think it's not going to serve them well.
Yeah.
And it's just not true.
And there's
of course,
nothing
Ted
that-
Cruz cares about what's happening here. It's going to determine whether he can run for president or not. If Trump can't run for president because of these things, he gets to run for president. I promise you he cares.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, what we're seeing here really sets the stage for taking all of this seriously. I mean, Peggy just said in the chat that she's actually looking forward to the next session. I feel the same way. I'm like, okay. Like,
Not sure we're going to
episode
watch it all
2.
together or anything, but I'm
know,
looking forward to it. It's a lot of those.
Oh, I feel like
Should
we're
we?
gonna
Should
be
we do
doing
them all?
this
Should we pop
together.
them all on? Is this becoming a thing? Is this a little watch party thing we got? A little get some popcorn. Maybe we'll get the sound to work the whole time. All right, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I feel like we're gonna do that. That not just for the finale. We need to watch the whole.
Oh
series
yeah,
together.
okay. We're not just gonna have a finale watch party. All right, I hear you. Well, man, it's. I'll say this though. They said we're gonna show you things that you haven't seen before. I didn't feel that happened. I think there was another angle. There was a different approach. I hadn't heard Officer Edwards' story. I didn't know her at all from things, so they had kept that hidden away. You know, the other officers they're very most commonly out, it wasn't her. And I think there's something interesting. I was texting to you and Dan about this during this. I think there's something interesting that they picked a woman to be the face of the violence. I think that was smart, and because it's true, but also sometimes when you look at these strong tattooed men, you feel like, hey, you know, it's war, it's hand-to-hand combat. You don't feel like, and she even said it, like, I'm not trained for this. That's not what I'm out there to do. That's not what I signed up, like my grandfather did, but that's not what I signed up for. I thought that was really powerful, and I think the messenger on that one was something that's gonna carry some weight with some people that I think just look past male officers' role in things. Do you think that at all? I'm not even sure.
I
Everybody
think
sees
you're
it that way.
spot on. I think that there was some real care given to who we're going to interview first and whose story is going to be lead, because I think, you know, you just figure that this first installment of these hearings and the last one, which are the primetime ones, the other ones are during the day. I think they start at 10 a.m. Eastern time. You know, these are the ones that are going to have the biggest audiences, and so you get the opportunity to hear stories, and you hear the story of this woman knocked unconscious, and then, you know, once she regains consciousness, goes back to work and is involved in holding the line, is involved in helping other officers, and then something is sprayed on her, and then she's maced after that. And just wow, what a story.
And you know, look, I know Liz Cheney said it at the beginning. They were going to get to why the Capitol wasn't better protected. I know that's a real talking point for some of the Republicans because they feel like some of that blame is going to fall on the Democrats and Nancy Pelosi's office because they have to sign off on all protection. So there are some things that I think don't look good for the entire system about how they responded to these threats. Now, Rob, you and I have been in Washington, D.C. We've been at many of these things. I've been in many actions and protests. I've been on many sides of these things. And I pulled permits for us to do a walk and a march of people through Washington. We did it with the Faith Leaders Walk the Walk march that we did, where we walked 150 miles from the same group of people and their violent act at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, where Heather Heyer was murdered by one of the Trump supporting rioters with his car. And we walked from there all the way to Washington, D.C. to join the March on Washington. So you have to pull these permits, and you get involved in all of this and all the people and all the places. And man, the number of things that went on for that march in January of 2020, in August of 2020. So before all of these things happened, the amount of security that was around for the March on Washington was unbelievable.
Yep.
I wasn't there for January 6th. I don't know, but I'm just looking at the people we saw on that side of the Capitol. And man, when I was there, just on the, this is a thing that Al Sharpton and others had organized to put together. The amount of security was remarkably more than this. And this actually had warnings from the FBI and others. So I'm not trying to take the eye off the ball. But what we can't do, I think, in this country is say we're only going to deal with one set of facts at a time. This is a complex system. The right things were not done on both sides, on preparation for this and protection of it, and then follow-up, and that has to be answered. Now, whether that's going to fall on the White House, or that's going to fall on the Defense Department, or that's going to fall on the House of Representatives, it shouldn't matter. They better look into all of this, and they better talk about it, because to put these officers out there and to allow those people to get that close to the Capitol and to break in without resistance. Now, I think it lands on Trump. I'll tell you that. I think Trump was supposed to call in the National Guard. I think Mike Pence was trying to. I think the Defense Department had heard, don't do that. I'm not sure if, that's stuff I've heard in other reports, but I don't know. I think that's a big deal. And I sure hope we don't get into an argument in this country about, let's not talk about the process, because that's just not going to serve us well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's probably, as in any situation, there are opportunities to learn. People, you don't take things as seriously as you should. And, all of that is true. And opportunities to learn. And, I think there's going to be, things that we point at and we go, okay, we wish, that had there had been different decisions made at different points along the way. All of that is not the same as knowingly lying about the results of an election, inviting people to Washington, D.C. on the pretext that you can somehow overturn the results of the election, and then inspiring them to riot and storm the Capitol to stop it.
Right. And you threatening Mike Pence before, they go there, well, then it turns into hang Mike Pence and bring Mike Pence out. Yeah. No, for sure. Look, it's not the same. But the same government, right? The Trump government was in charge of security. He's the commander in chief, including of Washington, D.C. He has the military under his control, including, in Washington, D.C., the National Guard. It's his call. That those people were not there and in place is another failure. And any way that it involves anyone else, to not look, this is nothing new. We still take our shoes off to get on an airplane because 15 years ago someone attempted to blow up an airliner. The fact that the same forces that have put many military protections into DC didn't do it here, that's not an accident. That's because either they didn't think these people were a threat, or they wanted to allow more freedom for these folks. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, and the way you answer conspiracy sounding things, which is kind of starting to sound like, is with openness. Right? That's how you drive out conspiracy theories, is to say all the things that are true. And then when someone still doesn't believe you, well, then they're just, denying the truth and the facts. But you're right. Yeah, look, the fact that Trump, before the election, don't miss this one, right? Before the election, told people this is a rigged election. Before there was even a vote cast. He was saying it in June. He was asked in the summer of 2020. He was literally asked, if you don't win the election, will you concede? And he said, It depends. Remember? Okay, so it has nothing to do with the facts. It has nothing to do with anything else. He said that the election in 2016 was rigged before he won it. He said that the nomination process in Iowa in 2015 was rigged. It's his thing. He says it all the time. And he's trying to get people all the time to fight on his side about this stuff. So the man had been ginning people up to not accept this election for his entire presidency. He literally talked about it his first week in office. And if I don't win again, it was rigged. I'm not even making this stuff up. So you're right. His ongoing is before the election, during the election, after people were casting ballots, on election night, after the certification, he violated his oath of office repeatedly. And the same Senate, many people who don't want to watch this one or say that they didn't want to watch it, chose not to hold him accountable for those things. Yep. And the Democrat and the Republicans are considering nominating him again. Just let that sit in for a minute.
Yeah.
He wants this to be his next inauguration. And if you think that you voting or not voting on this coming November doesn't have everything to do with whether this is going to be normative in America, it certainly does.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, I'm not into those fear-mongering emails. And, if you get on the email list of Vote Common Good, which you should have, voteCommonGood.com, you'll get to see the email list right there. We're not going to send you scary emails. As we like to say, these people are like self-cleaning ovens. They do all the work for you. We don't have to scare you. They're scary. The insurrectionists supporting Trump attacking crowd and Trump himself and his cohort, they are scary.
Well, as I always say,
Unbelievable.
we have so much work to do. We've got to, we all have to, this ought to be a motivating thing for us headed towards, November and the midterms. There's so much on the line.
I have lost track of the chat. You are right. Keep telling the good people about how all this is. Well, here Benjamin shares with us that he hopes that Trump gets primaried. Honestly, Trump causes too much chaos.
On that, we are agreed, Benjamin.
We are agreed. And Wendy says, Doug and Rob, you're right. This November is the most important election in your lifetime. I kind of like that. I think, it's like every day. Every day is the most important day of your lifetime. This is the first day of the rest of your life. And every election, most important.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Then something about Hitler, and then...
Ooh, I missed the... Oh, yeah. The sin part.
And then I think Wendy's saying that ultimately the White House has the final say when military force is going to be used in the District of Columbia. Just a little side note, for nerdy people. The District of Columbia doesn't function like a state, and that's really an irritant to many of the people who live in the District of Columbia because they don't have the representation the rest of us do, even though they live in the city. Because it's a federal area, and so it's recognized as a district. But that's because the federal government keeps control of that land. The federal government, to all you libertarians and people worried about overreach of the government, federal government doesn't actually have control over any property, other than embassies and federal buildings. But here they actually have land that they're in charge of. And what happens on that land, literally the line that, this side of the road versus that side of the road is very well determined and dictated. There's a mayor of D.C., but she has to coordinate everything she asks for. She has to coordinate everything she asks for with the federal government. And not just because it's her. Obviously, anybody who's the mayor, they didn't put her on a special limitation or anything. So whatever didn't happen there is in the hands of the federal government. And whether it's how that all gets negotiated, people are still honestly trying to figure out, at least people that I'm reading, people don't always know. And I've raised this before, and I'm just going to raise it again, and I think it's worth asking. The deadly force restraint that Capitol Police used is interesting to me. Mm-hmm. So many times we have seen police officers saying that when their physical health and their safety is in jeopardy, they're authorized to use physical deadly violence. Only one gun was fired as far as I know, and that was through that door into the Capitol. And I'm curious about that. I've asked men who were in these fights there, Capitol Police officers, and they said, we thought it was going to be more dangerous if we started to use our weapons. But that sits odd to me too. I don't know what's going. I think it's worth raising, and I'm not critiquing the Capitol Police for their actions at all. Zero. I'm interested in what went on there when this was for hours.
Yeah.
So it wasn't even like just a flash of a moment and you decided not to. It went on, and then it came in surges over and over. And I'm just really curious when they were seeing other officers being beaten, why that didn't happen. I don't know if the committee is going to get to it.
So
Monday
at 10 a.m. Eastern, which is 9 a.m. Central for those of us in Central Time, hearing number 2.
Sorry, say those times again. When are they?
It's Monday.
This Monday?
Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And
we can do a podcast at 8 like normal, Rob, and then be ready for one of these little ditties.
Just go right into it. Yep. The theme for the day, the episode guide, the IMDb says, I shouldn't make light of it like that.
No,
but
I shouldn't.
Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information, despite the fact that he knew that he had lost the election. So
that last sentence is important to me. That'll be interesting, won't it?
Yeah.
If they're like, look,
we
can
begun to make that case already. And so what that does is it moves this out of the political rhetoric. It's just political rhetoric. It doesn't mean anything, to the point of being, oh no, it actually has consequences. It is illegal for you to do this because you've been told you lost the election, because you have lost all of these court cases. It moves what Donald Trump did and said, beyond just it's just a
you're saying
campaign
that
speech.
It's not free speech, or it's not just political language if he knew that the things he was saying were untrue, and he then had a motive to say untrue things to people. Makes it different? Is that what you're saying? I mean,
I believe so. And what it does is it actually moves it, because he knows it's not true. His invitation and his encouragement of it becomes illegal, becomes seditious.
Okay,
he's not acting in good faith.
Okay, that's a good point, because Benjamin makes a point that I've made to you before, Rob, on some of the podcasts. I think Trump actually believes he won because I think he's delusional. And even though people tell him things, I think he just still believes other things. I've thought that makes a difference. I'm not sure if it does or not. I mean, not for culpability or anything morally, but for legal culpability. What I hear you saying is that, boy, if the committee can show he knew it wasn't true. So it wasn't what I was suggesting, and I think Benjamin's suggesting, that Trump is delusional and I'm saying he's delusional and believes something that's provably untrue, and he believes it anyway. That, no, this was all just a grift. This was all just a lie to grab more money and to keep himself alive and to overcome his shame and all of this. That if he knows it, that puts him in different, do you think, legal responsibility for his actions?
I think that's what the committee's going to show. I think that was the point that, Attorney General Barr, the other folks, White House counsel threatening to resign, Ivanka Trump saying, when I heard what Bill Barr was saying, that was enough for me. Jared Kushner saying that
Sure.
was all about saying the president was told the truth and he refused to believe it. He knew what was true, but he refused to believe it.
Okay, but refusing to believe it and he knew it wasn't true feel different to me. So I think what they're arguing is, I don't know, can you read the title again for what they're saying? That they're going to say that they knew that he was aware that the things he was saying were untrue, or that he chose not to believe the infidels.
On June 13th is aimed at showing Trump engaged in a massive effort to spread false and fraudulent information despite the fact that he knew that he had lost the election.
And I think, look, it sort of depends on the definition of is here, right? To throw us back into another presidential moment. The difference between even though he knew that it wasn't true or is different than even though he didn't believe that it wasn't true. So if they have something that the rest of us would consider proof that Trump knew it and didn't believe and didn't act and acted in ways that were inconsistent with what he knew, that's a big deal. I think politically it's a really big deal, actually. I mean, I think it just, Ted Cruz will be dancing in his little oversized Texas boots for that one. So will Rick DeSantis, right? Because then they can just say, this is our clear path to run. If there's something that looks like, I know I didn't win written on a sheet of paper, in his weather map changing marquee, Sharpie marquee. I think I just coined a new pen, the marquee. Boy, if that will be interesting on Monday. I'm with the rest. I'm willing to have a watch party if what they're going to come out with is,
he knew he lost.
He
did it anyways.
And he still knows he lost, and he's still saying the things that aren't true. I will just say this, and I am not a defender of this argument at all. I just think it's important to hear what the Trump supporters are saying. The great majority of the people who I know who still support Donald Trump and say that they think the election was rigged, it was not for them saying someone changed votes, that Trump needs to find votes, that they hid them, that there was Chinese paper, that somebody did something with Dominion voting machines. Their point is that early voting and mail-in voting that allowed Biden to win was made possible against state rules in many states where it mattered. Therefore, that gave an advantage that the state didn't pass. It's a technical argument that they're making. They lost that argument in court over and over, but that's when they say it was rigged, what they're saying, and this is what people I know that I care about who believe this stuff, that's what they're saying. They're not saying we think that ballots and stuff were switched. They're saying it was made unfair early on because they allowed too many people to vote. To which, just pause for a minute and say two things. It was a pandemic and everybody was figuring out how to vote. And if you lose because too many people vote, because more people had the chance to vote so you couldn't win, that's not a rigged election. That's just, it's just not what, no one should be like, if that 5,000 people in that county hadn't had a chance to vote, I would have won. Well, that's just ridiculous talk. And so,
legislatures let me just run down. Let
me
just run down the hearing. So, Monday's hearing is that Trump knew that he lost the election, and spread false and fraudulent information. Then, a couple of days later, the hearing 3 will be about how Trump attempted to influence and possibly replace the United States Attorney General because Bill Barr refused to go along with his election claims.
Okay.
And then hearing 4 will be about how Trump attempted to pressure Mike Pence to overturn the results of the election. So it's laying out the case. He knew. He went after Bill Barr. He went after Mike Pence. And then hearing 5 is about how he used his office to unduly influence state legislators and election officials. And then hearing 6 and 7.
Good grief. There's 7 of these?
Are meant to show how he summoned a violent mob and directed them illegally to march on the U.S. Capitol and then failed to act when they invaded. So basically what they're saying is Trump knew, this is the narrative, Trump knew that he lost.
I'm going to get out a Sharpie.
He lied about it.
I'm going to write these down. He knew.
He knew and lied about it.
He lied. Oh, those go together?
He tried. Yeah.
Well, you knew and lied. I'm trying to I'm making a list to hold up in front of the camera. Okay.
He knew and he lied. Bill Barr, he tried to get Bill Barr to go along with him, and Bill Barr wouldn't. He tried to get Mike Pence to go along with him, and Mike Pence wouldn't. He tried to get state legislator and election officials to go along with him, and they wouldn't. And so, as a result, he called mobs to D.C. to violently and forcibly stop the election results from being certified. And when they did that, he didn't do anything to stop them. That's the argument that's being made by the committee.
Well done. Did you pull that off of the internet somewhere, or did somebody show that to you? All right, so here's what I got. It's going to make my white balance go crazy. All right, you should be able to read that. I got a little special thing on my camera that's supposed to be able to let you read that. You can't read that, can you?
No, it came in for a second. Bring it
That's
back
terrible. I got to figure this out. I got a setting on my camera.
There we go. There we go. Oh.
All right.
Yep.
So he knew and he lied. Then went to Bill. Bill said no. Went to Mike. Mike said no. Went to the states. States said no. Then called a mob. They said yes. See that dramatic pause? They said yes. And then he did nothing
to stop them.
He did nothing.
That's the
so
argument.
okay, here that's great. Episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here's the thing. I'm surprised that they're as focused as they are on the actions of Donald Trump, frankly. Nowhere in that storyline is, and maybe it'll come out, but in the headlines, which is why I was asking if you got that or if somebody else provided it, it's all Trump focused. I think there's a lot of people in the Senate and the House who are also complicit in this stuff.
Yes.
And I'm interested where that's going to come out, or if this is going to stay focused on Trump. I think it will be a huge mistake if it stays only focused on Trump.
Yeah.
I think they've got to talk about Jim Jordan. They got to talk about Mo Brooks. They've got to talk about
Matt Gaetz, Lauren
Matt
Boebert,
Gaetz,
Marjorie Taylor Greene,
the whole crowd. They got to talk about the senators, Haley and Mike.
Hawley.
What's his name? Hawley.
Josh Hawley.
And Cruz and the other people that were the ones who,
Yep.
And again,
Madison Cawthorn spoke at that same rally.
All of this has to be looked at. So if I hope they do, and I never want to lose my front row seat in people of good conscience and faith that work hard to stop Donald Trump from ever hurting this country again. So I'm not giving the man a pass. I'm just saying I think it's more than that.
Yeah, I agree.
This is a comment from Jessica. She's saying Elsie
Liz Cheney
mentioned other senators, didn't she? Yeah, I thought I was still fussing with the sound at that moment. I felt like I heard something, and you had said, did she say congressmen or members of Congress or something?
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
She did. Okay.
She did. Yeah, she did. She said congressmen who committed crimes in the midst of this. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica, for reminding us that happened, and I sure hope that comes out. All right. Well, we've been at it a long time.
So let's do this again on Monday.
Again on Monday. Yeah, all right. Well, we'll do it. Everybody, let's do it. Check our email. We'll do the same thing. Same channel. Please go hit that subscribe button already. That's the cleanest way to stay up. It also helps us. And honestly, we just needed 5 more tonight, so we're just really pandering now. It's moved on to full pander mode. And look, there's still a bunch of you watching. I can see it. Go click. Really, no. Look up. Look back down. Grab your thing. Just move it on your finger and move it and push that button. And look, we won't see if you didn't, but we will see if you did. You see what I'm saying? So if we see your name in the chat and I don't see your name on a subscriber, I'm gonna write up a list like this, and I'm gonna cross-reference it, and then I'm gonna say nice things about you in my nightly prayers. All right. Well, all of you beautiful children of this flat earth of ours, I think this is enough. Have we gone long enough? I was looking for a timer. I know I've been sitting in this chair for 3 hours.
We're at 2:48.
Really? Should we just go another 12 and just get it right to the 3-hour mark? We'll do that on Monday. Monday will be a 3-hour. Well, Jessica, thank you. I'm glad that you didn't know we had a YouTube channel until now. We haven't spent a lot of time on our YouTube channel, but we are now, which is partly why we're begging and, it's cajoling and all the rest of it.
We've got content that is YouTube only.
It's so good. Yeah. It's just, there's days I can barely get other work done from watching our YouTube channel. Not just from making YouTube videos, but just watching on scroll. Wendy, thank you for already subscribing. If you have more than one identity on the internet, like you have more than one email address, don't let any of your emails go without their own subscription. If you love your email, do something nice for it and get it its own subscription to the Vote Common Good channel. So, in other words, log in with another email and then subscribe again. That would be fun. Okay. Thanks all for being a part of this. We think the world of you, and are glad that you were willing to watch this with us. And no one more than my wife is glad that this happened so that she could just watch this in peace without having to listen to me chat over her ear and then talk, and turn on MSNBC and then talk over those people. So thanks on behalf of her and for all of you. Benjamin, you're welcome anytime, my friend. You're welcome for the open discussion. Okay, so I think that's it. We will see you all
10 a.m. on Monday.
10 a.m. on Monday. Okay. Good night. Now I got to figure out how to take this thing off the internet. And that little trick right there is because I got to figure out, nobody really cares what I'm doing, but what I have to do is I use a teleprompter and I have to move my whole eCam over, but you can't move eCam because when you touch it, it just moves all the top layers. eCam, if you're still watching, God knows you're not, make it a way for someone to move the whole window without moving the elements, like lock the elements, like that kind of a, there probably is one.
You can lock the elements.
You can? Just literally thinking right now when I said that there's probably a lock the elements.
There's a little lock thing, like in the scenes, there's like a little lock icon.
I got a hotkey. Got a hotkey but no lock. Somewhere. All right. We're just going to keep this thing going in case somebody's still hanging around. We're just driving up our minutes now. Now it's just sheer pandering at this point. All right. Well, hopefully C-SPAN doesn't give us a copyright violation for this. All right. We'll see you. Okay. Bye. Ending broadcast.